Something curious to me, Dr. Ramani, is how two children can be raised in the same family, and one can grow into a narcissist, and the other one can not have that same path. Why and how is that happening?
You know, we've talked about this repeatedly on other MedCircle series, is like how and why do people become narcissistic? You would think if it's all developmental, two people from the same family should end up in the same place. Things like birth order, you know, what the children mean to the parents. Boys may be treated differently by girls. We know there's some sort of genetic elements to temperament. Some kids are more tightly wound, impulsive, hypersensitive, the things that could potentially be more predictive of narcissism. Was something going on in the parent's life during one child's childhood and not another? So there's a lot of things that could be at play. But it happens all the time. And Kyle, it's actually one of the more heartbreaking narcissistic relationships people deal with. Because when you were very small, this was your playmate. You know, I always say that your sibling is sometimes your only shared historian. There's pictures of you in the bath together. Like, they were your first playmate in some cases. And so the idea that you will be estranged from them or not have that relationship, a lot of people become angry. They have to grieve it. Like, this isn't fair. I want a cool sibling relationship. And so it can actually be a really devastating recognition. But if you talk, it's interesting, when I've talked to people with narcissistic siblings, in almost every case, especially those who are 5 years or in age difference or closer, when there's big age gaps, it can make it a little harder because it's harder to sort of track that sibling because they're already doing such different things than you. But 5 years or less, they'll say, you know what, this kind of narcissistic coldness, entitlement, lack of empathy, that was seen in their sibling even when they were younger. How they played, how they shared, how they talked, how they fought, how they tried to compete for their parents. Many of them say, you know, I hate to admit it, and I can understand why they wouldn't over-pathologize in childhood. They're like, I want this person to be my friend. It's always been fraught. You know, so these patterns, actually the siblings have more eyes on it than anybody else. But in adulthood, this is a relationship that can get downright ugly. And I don't think people are prepared for that, because your sibling is someone with whom, for example, things like as your parents get older, there's issues like trusts, estates, wills, who gets more money. Mom and dad paid for you to go to law school. I expect them to spend this much money on a down payment for a house or on my wedding. That narcissistic sibling often keeps score. They gave you that, they should give me this. And so they'll try to outdo you. Well, you think you're taking mom and dad on that vacation? I'm going to do this. I'm going to buy them a house. So it's a lot of trying to outplay the other sibling, but it can actually get really dark as the parents get older, where there's a lot of sort of fooling around about family finances, the narcissistic sibling feeling much more entitled to a bigger proportion of the trust or will, or even taking more money from the parent while they're still living, but often not being that interested in helping to take care of that parent should they become old or infirm. So it feels very unjust, it feels very imbalanced, it feels really awful, quite frankly. And they may be the parents of cousins to your children. And you'll feel like, I can't deal with my sibling. And so it can get complicated, especially in the case where you're in one of those rare families where neither of the parents are super narcissistic, or if they are, it's manageable, but it's the sibling that's super narcissistic. And now the reason you're struggling going to family events is because you're trying to avoid the sibling. And many times the parents will enable the narcissistic sibling. Oh, come now, it's nothing. Be nice to your brother or sister like you're still 6. And that can be really challenging. And sometimes siblings will have to break away from the entire family system because of a narcissistic sibling.
Let's talk about that. When you say break away, they mean no contact.
They cut off contact. They cut off contact.
Don't call me, don't text me. I'm not going to go to your nephew's baseball game anymore. We're out.
And that sibling who says, I can't deal with this narcissistic nonsense anymore. I'm not going to be an enabler anymore. They cut off. They may lose access to their own parents because the parents will still be back in the narcissistic sibling. You know, because they're saying, well, they don't say you're narcissistic sibling. Well, your brother or sister stuck around. Why do you have to go off? You're being too sensitive. And the entire family will band together and gaslight the person who says, enough is enough. I'm not putting up with this anymore.
How can it get that bad where you are willing to lose your entire family over somebody's personality disorder?
You have no idea. I mean, it's all the stuff we talk about with narcissism. If you think about a narcissistic husband or wife or boyfriend or girlfriend, the things they do, the gaslighting, the manipulation, the cruelty, the invalidation, the dehumanization. Sibling does the same thing, maybe not the infidelity part, but everything else. It feels awful. Of course it feels awful from a sibling, and narcissistic siblings often triangulate in the family system. They put it as, make it 2 against 1. They band with one or both parents, and they'll even sort of gang up. That dynamic you had in childhood of being scapegoated may literally play out all the way into adulthood. And in many of these cases that I've worked with or seen, the siblings' only survival came from distancing themselves. Some of them haven't talked to their parents in 15 years, and it's largely because they're trying to keep distance from the narcissistic sibling, who still has almost brainwashed the parents and has often taken all the money and everything. I mean, it gets really, really dark.
Okay, so we know in past sessions of this series and other series you've done for MedCircle how to interact with a narcissist, even if it is your sibling at events or whatnot. Is there anything the parents in this scenario could do to talk to that narcissistic sibling that could ease the waters a bit?
If other family members get involved, where it gets tricky is anytime you try to intervene with a narcissist. They're going to defend, they're going to deflect, they're going to rationalize, they're going to use all the usual narcissistic tricks. So the parents may not have any more power in that, as it were, than anybody else would. What a parent should do is be able to hear with open ears, open mind, open heart, the experiences that the sibling is experiencing, who is being harmed by the narcissistic sibling.
Right.
Don't invalidate their experience. Don't gaslight them by saying this isn't really happening, you're being too sensitive. Hear them out, and then work with your child to figure out how can you at least maintain a healthy relationship with your child. And if you don't want to give up on your narcissistic child, I get that, but don't try to force something that's uncomfortable and try to set those boundaries. And if anything, that parent, when they talk to that narcissistic sibling, instead of saying, hey, you're a narcissistic brother, maybe point out the pattern and say, your sister felt hurt because when you had said da-da-da-da, 99 times out of 100, that narcissistic sibling's going to, again, defend, rationalize. So it tends to be a waste of air and honestly of social capital in a way. But I think that's the only way it can happen. But I think a narcissistic parent really has to be cautioned. Don't tell your child, you guys can go figure this out, as though they're 6. Your child would not have gotten here if they hadn't been so hurt by this sibling. Listen to them.
If your sibling has children, and you worry that this narcissistic sibling of yours is raising narcissistic children, is there anything they can do?
I think that, when we talk about radical acceptance in this world of narcissism, sometimes it's about knowing when you need to step away and realize you can't intervene on what's a really, really sad situation. If you occasionally have contact with those kids, your nieces, nephews, you can certainly model healthy behavior, empathy, reciprocity. But I got to be honest with you, if you're only seeing these nieces and nephews a few times a year, and they're with their parents' narcissism the rest of the time, this train is going to run into the wall, and you can't stop it. And that's where in families you see a lot of fallout.
How do you talk to your own children about an uncle or aunt that is narcissistic, or if you have made the decision to leave? And they're not going to see Uncle Tony anymore. What do you tell them?
Let the child ask about it. You don't have to make, well, I'm just making an announcement, everyone. Uncle Tony's out.
Right.
It doesn't have to be this big histrionic, grandiose show. If the kids say, how come we're not seeing Uncle Tony at Thanksgiving? You want to give them an age-appropriate explanation, and one that does not denigrate or insult Uncle Tony, because that's not healthy behavior to model for your children, but to really say, you know what, I think that at this time Uncle Tony has, other people and other ways to spend his time, and, right now that they're a little busy this year, and so we may not be able to get together. If they're people they were accustomed to seeing on a regular basis and they really notice it much more quickly, and maybe even seen you having arguments, say, you know what, just like, you know how you and your sister sometimes argue? Sometimes grown-ups argue like that too, and we're just trying to figure it out. So please know Uncle Tony does love you, you know, and you kind of have to give them kind of an artificial party line, because sometimes kids will wonder, did I do something? Am I responsible for this? And try and let it go. Does that mean I'm not going to see my cousins anymore? It does mean you may not see them for a little while, honey, because they're busy with some other stuff right now. I mean, don't never lie to your kid.
That's got to be heartbreaking, though, to lose a best friend who is a cousin for a 9-year-old.
It definitely happens. But here's the thing. If you're going to put that line in the sand, don't keep going back and forth. If you're going to really lower the guillotine like that, then you're done. But to say, well, now we're not mad at Uncle Tony and your cousins again, that's not going to fly.
Yeah, make a decision.
Make a decision and understand when you make those bigger ticket decisions, there's ramifications. Sadly, many times when narcissistic adults who have children get into conflicts with people, they'll use their children as pawns. And so they'll say, okay, if that's how it's going to be, then you don't get to see your nieces and nephews anymore. And it's for that reason alone. A lot of people have to use the usual techniques, the expectations management and all of that, the not engaging, so they can keep a superficial relationship with that person, so they can see the more precious relationships, nieces, nephews, grandchildren, that kind of thing.
Right. All right, well, in our next session, we'll talk about the managing tactics you can use when your child is a narcissist. Thanks for watching. Check out the links below for more information on how to access this full series, and subscribe to our YouTube channel to watch new mental health videos every week. Did you like what you heard in this video? If you want to ask a MedCircle doctor a question directly, you can learn how by visiting the links in the description below.